We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Bezim and Bezim Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 22b. The Gemara is continuing its discussion of Yish Shalom Midas. Again, Abaya says Yish Shalom Midas is not Yish, and Rava says Yish Shalom Midas is Yish. And the Gemara is in the middle of bringing a proof from a Brisa. The Brisa is dealing with the idea of Hechsher L'Kabel Tumah. When fruits touch one of the Zayim Mashkim, when they touch one of the 7 liquids, they become prepared to be Makabel Tumah. And the Brisa says, let's say the dew fell on these fruits and it already dried. And after it dried, it was nichale, it was good, it was pleasing to the owner that the dew fell on them. So the Brisa says, Einon b'chiyutan. That's not called b'chiyutan. It's not considered a hechsher l'kabel tumah. And Rashi says, Einon b'chiyutan v'lo amrinan. The point over here is we don't say, kevan dahashtanicha, since right now it is pleasing to the owner, mehani haydaita l'meikorav to have a hechsher. Therefore, the fact that he has das now is going to help retroactively. We don't say that. In other words, we don't say that yish shalom midas is yish, so to speak, applying the same logic to hechsher l'kabel tumah, v'kasha l'Rava. So therefore, this is a question against Rava, and that's what the Gemara says. Taimamai. What's the reason? La mishum de lo amrin. Isn't it because we don't say kevan de gloi milsa dahashta nichale, that since it's revealed right now that it's pleasing to the owner, may karanami nichale. So therefore, we assume from the outset it was nichale. We don't say that logic. Again, this is a question against Rava. And the Gemara answers to that, Shani Hasam, no, it's different over there. You can't bring a proof from Kabbalah's Tumah, from the Hechsher L'Kabel Tumah, to our case of Yish. Because there it's written a pasuk. We have a pasuk over there that says Kiyitain, and Kiyitain implies that he has to actually actively place the liquid. Ad Shiyitain, he has to actually do it, and therefore, since he has to actually do it according to the pasuk, that's why the fact that later on it's something that's pleasing to him is not going to be effective. But the Gemara says, one second, according to that, if so, Reisha Nami, then in the beginning also, meaning to say, the beginning of the Brisa said that let's say it's still wet, and at that point it's nichale. So then we say that it is prepared to be makabel tumah. But why should that be the case? He didn't actively put on the dew. The dew still fell by itself. Clearly, we're not applying kiyitain. So how come we're applying the issue of kiyitain at the end of the brisa, but we're not applying it at the beginning of the brisa? And the Gemara says to that, Hasam kid Rav Papa. The reason over there is like Rav Papa says. The Rav Papa Rami Ksiv, Rav Papa said it as a contradiction. The Rav Papa Rami, he had the following contradiction within the pasuk. Ksiv kiyitain. On the one hand, the pasuk is written as kiyitain, the karinan kiyutan. But on the other hand, when we read it, we read it as yutan in the passive. And so therefore, is it that we have to actually place the water or the one of the zayin mashkin on the fruit, or could it happen just by itself? And so we understand haketzat how so. Ba'inan kiyutan domya dechiyitain. We need the yutan to be similar to the yitain. And the point is, mayitain ladas af kiyutan nami ladas. When it's just like when you do it yourself, obviously that's with the person's knowledge. So too kiyutan is ladas, and that's why we make that distinction. And we say if it's still wet, so that's already kiyitain dumya kiyutan. But you don't apply that if it already dried. And Rashi explains, Ksiv kiyitain v'lo ksiv kiyutan. It's written yitain, it's not written yutan. Again, it's read as yutan. And we understand that to mean ladas, sheyada b'nesin, if he knows that the water touched the fruit, v'huchsher be'enav, and it was something good in his eyes, v'odeyu atalein, and the tal is still upon them, adayin hen b'nesina, so that's still considered in the act of nesina, so to speak. That's why over there it's considered prepared l'kabel tumah. Masha'en kain, that is not the case. Let's say it already dried. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael ben Yehud Tzadok. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael ben Yehud Tzadok, Minayin la'aveda sheshatfa nohar shimutaris. From where do we know that if you have an aveda lost object and it's swept away by the river, how do we know that that becomes mutter? T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, v'chein tasa l'chamoro v'chein tasa l'simloso v'chein tasa l'chol avedas achicha asher tovad mimenu mitzasa. It says this is what you should do with his donkey. This is what you should do with his garment. With any lost object, this is how you treat a lost object. And we darshan that pasuk as follows: Misha avuda heimenu. We're talking about something that is lost from him. Umitsuya etzel kol adam, but it can be found by other people. Meaning the lost objects that we're referring to in the pasuk, it's not lost from everyone. It's just lost from the owner. Yatsasa zu, that comes to exclude this case where it's swept away by a river. Shavuda mimenu ve'ena mitsuya etzel kol adam. In that case, it's lost from him and it's also not found by anyone else. It's swept away essentially from everyone. And so therefore we understand that Shatfanar, where everybody, so to speak, it's lost from everyone. In that case, we don't treat it like a regular Aveda that needs to be returned. That Aveda is going to be mutter. And so the Gemara now says, we make the following comparison. V'isura dumya dehatera. We compare the case of prohibition to the case where it's permitted. Meaning to say an Aveda shashat fanar is permitted, but then you have other lost objects, obviously, which are prohibited. You're not allowed to keep them. You have to return them. But we have to compare the two at a certain level and say as follows. Mahetera bein de ispasim and uvein de lespasim and shara. Gemara. Just like when we say Shatfa Nohar is mutter, whether it has a siman, whether it doesn't have a siman, it's going to be permitted. Afi Surah, so too when it comes to an item that's prohibited, to something that's not lost from everyone, so to speak, when it comes to that item that's prohibited, Bain de Isba Siman, Uvain de Lesba Siman, whether it has a siman and whether it doesn't have a siman, Asura is going to be prohibited. And the point over here is, here you have a situation of an item that doesn't have a siman. Now, why should it be prohibited if it doesn't have a siman? The answer is like Abaya. It's Yish Shalom Midas. Let's say the owner doesn't realize that he lost the item, and according to Abaya, Yish Shalom Midas is not Yish, and so therefore it would be usher. In other words, according to Abaya, you can understand such a comparison. You can understand how an object without a siman is going to be prohibited, and that's why the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rava, this is a refutation of Rava. Tiyufta, and the Gemara says, indeed, it is a refutation. Again, the way it reads is Tiyufta de Rava, should we say this is a refutation of Rava? And the Gemara says, Tiyufta, indeed, it is a refutation. And the Gemara says, V'hilchisa kivase de Abaya b'yal kagam. The Gemara concludes that the halacha is like Abaya in 6 cases. That's an acronym of Yal Kagam, and the Yud stands for Yush. The other letters stand for other cases, but the point is that by Yish Shalom Midas, the halacha is like Abaya. This is one of the 6 cases where the halacha follows Abaya, not Rava. And Rashi explains, Mimenu, again, the pasuk says, Mimenu, it's lost from him, Kroy Yiseiru, this is an extra pasuk, Lashmin, and it's an extra word in the pasuk to teach us, Sheino Avad Elohim, and we're talking about lost objects that are lost only from him, V'isura Dumya Dehater, and we have to compare the case of prohibited items to the case of permitted items. Kevin de Mechad Kroy Alfinon, Metziah Eitzel Kol Adam Sheyachzer, since it's all from one pasuk, we're learning out that if it's Metziah Eitzel Kol Adam, you got to return it. V'she'ena Metziah, but if it's not Metziah Yizkeba, then he's allowed to take it. Iskushe Iskesh Lahadadi, the 2 cases are compared. Zuli Surah Vizula Hatera. This one is going to be prohibited. This one is going to be permitted. And Rashi continues, Ma Hatera, just like the case which is permitted, She'ena Mitsuya, again, which is not found by anybody. Lo Chilak Ben Sheyesh Basim and L'She'en Basim. And there it doesn't matter whether it has a simon or not. Afi Surah, so to where it's prohibited, the Mitsuya Eitzel Kol Adam, that's a case where other people, it's found by other people, it's just lost from the owner. But Lo Chilak Ben Ein Simon, we don't make a distinction between whether you have a case where there's no simon, the Chiyada Miyash, in such a situation, if he knew that he lost it, he would despair. Liyesh simon, or a case where there is a simon, the L'Chiyada Lo Miyash, there when he finds out, he's not going to despair. Now, just like if it has a simon, obviously it's prohibited. Ki ein simon nami asira. Even without a simon, it can be prohibited. And when is that true? That would be in a case where he doesn't know that it fell. He doesn't know he lost it. Kodim shabasa liyadza, before it came to this person. Again, essentially saying yish shalom midas is not considered yish. And the 6 cases where we hold like Abaya are Yal Kagam, Simoni Halacha, saying this is just an acronym to know which halacha is Yish Shalom Midas Tahacha. First one is Yish Shalom Midas, that's right here. And the other one, the second one, Eid Zomim Lemafrei Hu Nifsal B'Sanhedrin, the case of Eid Zomim, retroactively being disqualified. Lechi Omin Me'ela Be'erevin, there's a case of Lechi, that's referring to the poll by the Erev. Kiddushin Shalom Nimsur L'Biyah B'Kiddushin, the case of Kiddushin, that's a case of a person having a Kiddushin, but it's not going to lead, so to speak, to an act of relations. That's a Machlokas in Kiddushin, Giloi Daita Begita Begitin, case where a person reveals what his intention is when it comes to giving a get, that's in Gittin. And Mumar Ochel Nevelos Lahachis, Pasal in Inyan Edis, the last case is somebody who eats non-kosher, eats Nevel, and he does it Lahachis to anger HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is disqualified in terms of Edus, and that's B'Sanhedrin, that's in Sanhedrin. Those are the 6 cases where we pass like Abaya, not Rava. And the Gemara continues, of Rava, but if it's true now that Rava is refuted and we say Yish Shalom Midas is not considered Yish, so Hani Tamri Dezeka, so when it comes to the dates that are blown off the trees, so how actually do we eat from those dates? It doesn't make sense. That's a case of Yish Shalom Midas, and apparently it is Yish. That's why we're eating from them. And the Gemara says, Amarlei said to him, Kevan deika shkatzim v'ramasim, to ka'achli lahu, since the shkatzim, the bugs and the creepy crawly creatures are eating them, may kare yusha miyayish minai, really from the outset already, the owner is miyayish, that is not a case of Yish Shalom Midas. And Rashi explains, Hani Tamri Dezeka Shaharuach Mesher, again, the wind is blowing off these dates. Heiche Achlina, how do we eat them? Halom Miyayish, again, he wasn't Miyayish, he didn't know yet. The Gemara then says that at the outset, really, he was Miyayish, but the Gemara initially assumes he wasn't yet Miyayish. And Rashi points out, V'hodin nakat l'mi boy me'achad yitos of Rava kashali. This is a question, why are we asking this question on Rava? To v'lo yitos of Rava, because even if you didn't refute Rava, iko l'mi boy, the hamod Rava b'chol davar shechazus u'mochiach. We said earlier that Rava admits any time the appearance of the item shows who it belongs to. So Rava admits that in that situation, you're not allowed to take it for yourself. Shechazuso mochiach olav, if the appearance shows who the owner is, so we say that Rava admits you're not allowed to take it. Chutz min hatena, we said the only exception is the fig, mivnei shenemesesim nefilasu, because it becomes disgusting when it falls. Here we're not talking about figs, here we're talking about dates. And so therefore Rava should admit in this situation, we know who it belongs to because we know what tree it fell from. And we know therefore the chazusa, again, the appearance of the situation shows who the owner is. Rava already admitted that you can't take it in that case. So even if we had not refuted Rava, this would be a question. And the Gemara says veneer, and Rashi says rather veneer be'enai. Rashi says it appears to me to lo nokat lo laharbos bechomer iser. What we're trying to do here is increase the stringency of the prohibition. Kilomar, what the Gemara means to say is as follows: me'achar di tosav afilu bedavar she'ein bo simin. If Rava has been refuted even by something where there is no simin, meaning to say we're refuting Rava and we're saying yish shalom midas is not yish, and so therefore even by something without a simin there is a prohibition if the person isn't aware that he lost it. So kol shekain she'elu asurin. So certainly when it comes to these dates, they are certainly going to be prohibited. Sheyesh ba and simin, because that's a situation where there actually is a simin. Again, that's the idea of chazuso mochiach olav, and so that's why we're asking this question. We're just essentially strengthening the question. Most certainly, how is it possible that we are eating from these dates? And again, the Gemara said that meikara mikodem nefila. So this person already from the outset, he's already before it even fell. Yiyushe miyayish. He's miyayish. The yodeya hu sharuach meisher mehen vashkatzim mizumonim lochlan. He knows the wind is going to blow them off, and he knows the bugs are going to eat them, and therefore this is a case already where the person from the outset is miyayish. And the Gemara continues, you asked me, what if these dates belong to orphans? They're not able to be mochel, they can't forgive, they can't render it ownerless. So what would be the halacha? How is it that we're able to eat from those dates? Amar Lei said to him, Baga biara diasmi lo mechazkinon. When it comes to the valley, we don't just assume, we don't just presume that the land of the valley belongs to orphans. The Gemara says, muchzak v'yomen mai, but what if we already have a chazaka? What if we know that this land belongs to orphans? Or karachta mai, what if this land is surrounded, there are no creatures getting into this land, no reason to be me'ayish at the outset? Amar Lei said to him, in those situations, asir, and in those situations, the dates would actually be prohibited. And Rashi explains, he asked me, katanim shein hefker and hefker. We're talking about orphans who are minors. They're not able to make something ownerless. So the Gemara initially says, Ba'aga bi'ar di'asmi lo mechazkinon, means ein oleino lahachzik kol habika bechezkas hakarka shel yisomim. We don't have to presume that the entire valley belongs to orphans, v'leser kol atmarim, and therefore prohibit all the dates, mishum safek karka shel yisomim, because of a doubt maybe the land belongs to orphans. El hochan acher harov, we can follow the majority. Then the Gemara said, muchzik v'yomed mai karka atzma shel yisomim mai. What if we know the land? There's already a presumption that this specific land belongs to Yisomim. Or karachta mai means dekolam hakruchin umukafin begeder shel avonim saviv. Let's say you have palm trees which are surrounded by stone fence, shein shkatzim uramasim nechnasim sham, that the bugs, the creatures don't get in there. What would be in that halach? And the Gemara said in that halach indeed it would be prohibited. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Krichos b'Rishos harabim hareilu shelo. If a person finds bundles of grain in Rishos harabim, he can keep them. Amar Rabba says, Va'afilu b'davar sheyesh bo simin. Even if it had a simin, still he's able to keep it. Gemara says, Alma kasava Rabba. We see from here that Rabba holds simin ha'asui lidaris. If you have a simin that's going to be trampled, essentially the simin is going to be ruined when it gets trampled. Lo have a simin that's not considered a simin. That's why he keeps it, even though it has a simin. Rava Amar Rava says, Lo shanu ela b'davar she'ein bo simin. This is only taught by an item that does not have a simin. Aval b'davar sheyesh bo simin, but if it has a simin chayiv l'hachriz, then the person would be obligated to announce it. You cannot keep it in a situation where it has a simin. Alma kasavar Rava, we see that Rava holds simin ha'asui lidares. If a simin is going to be trampled, still have a simin, still it's considered to be a simin. Ve'ika demasni l'hashmaita ban pei nafsha. Some learn this machlokus between Rab and Rava independent, and meaning to say not related to the Mishnah, just a general machlokus. Simin ha'asui lidares. If you have a simin that's going to be trampled, Rabba Omar lo have a simin. Rabba says it's not a simin. V'Rava Amar have a simin, and Rava says that it is a simin. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, this is actually a brisa, Krichos b'Rishos harabim, if you have bundles of grain in Rishos harabim, hareilu shelo, then he's allowed to keep them, b'Rishos hayachid, but if you have these bundles of grain in Rishos hayachid, no telo machers, you take it, and it has to be announced. The Gemara says, hey chidami, what exactly is the case? Why should we make a distinction between Rishos harabim and Rishos hayachid? Ida lesbu simin, if there is no simin, b'Rishos hayachid my machers, what is he announcing exactly in Rishos hayachid? Elo lav lav disbu siman. Rather, you'll have to say that it does have a siman. V'katani b'rishas harabim harei shalo, and it says over here that in rishas harabim he gets to keep it. Alma siman ha'asili dares lo have a siman. You see that a siman that is going to be trampled is not considered to be a siman. That's why in rishas harabim, where it's going to be trampled, that is not a siman. The Gemara says to the Rava. Let us say that that's a refutation of Rava. The Gemara says Amar lach Rava. Rava will say to you liolam delesbu siman. Really, we could say the brisa is talking about where there is no siman. Then the question is, if that's the case, what's going on in rishas hayachid? And if you're saying in rishas hayachid, what is being announced? The answer is machers makom. The answer is that the location is being announced. The Gemara says, V'Rabba Amar Barabba says, Makom lo have a siman. The place, the location is not considered a siman. That's why you can't announce the Makom. The Itmar, it was stated the following Machlokas Amoraim in terms of Makom. When it comes to Makom, when it comes to the location, Rabba Amar lo have a siman. Rabba says that's not considered a siman. V'Rava Amar have a siman. And Rava says that it is a siman. And so it turns out that the understanding of this brisa really depends. Why are we making a distinction between Rishas HaYachid and Rishas HaRabim? In one approach, we're making a distinction because in Rishas HaRabim it's going to be trampled. In the second approach, we're making a distinction because you can be machriz the location when it comes to Rishas HaYachid. And Rashi explains, ha'asli lidaris, again, if it is a siman that is going to be trampled, we have a machlokas between Rava and Rabba, means to say, sha'amakom shusham, means that the place where the item is, ragil bedrisas b'nei adam, that's a place where people walk, v'hachefetz namuch, and the object is very low to the ground, v'noach lidaris, it's easy to get trampled, and so again, according to Rabba, this siman ha'asli lidaris, according to Rabba, is not a siman, and according to Rava, that is a siman, lo have a siman, it's not a siman according to Rabba, she'in bailav somech, lo bo siman, the point is the owners are not relying on that siman. Meimar Amar nishchas hasiman, because the owner says it's going to be destroyed, that siman, bedrisas haraglayim, because people are stepping on it. And then we had the brisa which makes the distinction between Rishas HaRabim and Rishas HaYachid. Rishas HaYachid is kegon besad zrua. That's like a planted field. Shein ro b'nei adam dorchen, but people don't walk there. V'yeshemiyot sheholchen, but there's just a small amount of people that walk there. And then the Gemara said, idalesbu siman b'Rishas HaYachid my machers. If there is no siman, so in Rishas HaYachid, what exactly is being announced? Kilomar ki machers zeh motza aveda my machers. Meaning, when the person announces, I found an aved, I found a lost object, what is he announcing? Sheyu chaliten ha'ovid siman ba. That then the person who lost it is able to give a siman. In a normal case with a siman, so you announce the object that was lost, whatever the item might have been, the bundle of grain, etc., and then you say, I would like a siman on the bundle of grain. If there is no siman, what are you going to announce that the person's able to respond? And so the Gemara said, machriz mokum, you can announce the location, ve'eno machriz shem aved, and then you just won't announce what the lost object was, ela shem hamokum, you'll just announce the name of the location, misha avda mimenu aveda b'mokum ploni, whoever lost something in such and such a place, yavo v'yomer ma'ivet should come and say what was lost, v'zeh bo v'yomer avarati sham chevetz ploni, and the person will come and say, I lost this particular item. And again, then the Gemara goes on to say there's a machlokus with regards to location as well. Rabba says that's not a siman, and Rava says that is a siman. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come here a proof from the following brisa, Krichos b'Rishas HaRabim, bundles of grain in Rishas HaRabim, Harei l'shalo, he can keep them, meaning the person who finds them can keep them. B'Rishas HaYachid, if he finds them in Rishas HaYachid, no telumachers, he has to take it and announce it. Va'alumos, and the large sheaves, bein B'Rishas HaRabim, bein B'Rishas HaYachid, whether in Rishas HaRabim, whether in Rishas HaYachid, no telumachers, he always has to take it and announce it. And the Gemara says, Rabba hechi mitaretz la, Rabba hechi mitaretz la. How does Rabba explain this brisa? And how does Rava explain this brisa? And the Gemara explains, Rabba mitaretz l'taimei b'simin. Rabba will explain it according to his opinion. We're talking here about simin, meaning to say it's going to be simin ha'asili daris. V'Rava mitaretz l'taimei b'mokum, and Rava will explain this brisa according to his opinion. He'll say it has to do with location. Rabba mitaretz l'taimei b'simin. Rabba will explain it according to his opinion in terms of simin. Krichos b'Rishas HaRabim harei l'shalo. When it comes to bundles of grain in Rishas HaRabim, he can keep them mishum because. And Rashi explains, v'alumos omrim gedolim. Again, alumos are large sheaves. Rabba hechi mitaretz la, Rabba damartaim Rishas HaRabim mishum denidras, meaning Rabba who says that the reason in Rishas HaRabim why he's allowed to keep it is because it gets trampled. Ma'ishna alumos, why are the large sheaves different? V'Rava demukim l'krichos kashein bo simin, and Rava who says we're talking about bundles without a simin, ma'ishna krichos or ma'ishna alumos, what's the difference between bundles of grain and the large sheaves? And the Gemara says Rabba mitaretz l'taim made the time of Rishas HaRabim the krichos mishum simin u'v'davar sheyesh bo simin. Again, Rabba will understand we're talking in Rishas HaRabim with something that does have a simin, and the idea is again it's going to get trampled. But Makom and Rava will say, no, we're talking about location. Time of the Krichos b'Rishas HaRabim, Mishum Makom. The reason of Krichos and Rishas HaRabim is because of the location that it is. Uvedavar she'ein bo simin. And again, we're talking according to Rava, we're talking about something that does not have a simin, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph.